Although founded in 1946, it wasn't until the founder S. Druid Cathy discovered a pressure fryer method that could cook chicken with the speediness as a fast food hamburger that he officially registered the name Chick-fil-A in 1968-1969. Going back to the idea of a basic shared experience among large numbers of people, at times it's not even necessary to know why the basic shared experience is an error, why the mismemory occurs. At times, it is enough to recognize such an error, and it can be proven to be an error. Whatever specific variable induced this error, even among Mandela effect believers, clearly has been occurring. Once again, simultaneous evidence nicely demonstrates that human inadvertence is a huge factor at play. Whether the oversight is based on the consumer or the creator of content, it can come from either or both, further compounding the mistake. As shown here, another person who happened to write this article in 1994 shows us the mistake we have seen before in this presentation. The title is in huge letters, incorrectly spelled CHIC, while in the body of the article it was published correctly as CHICK. And this one here is an absolute gem. In this article from 1981, the journalist included a picture of the fast food restaurant. In that picture, which obviously is a picture of the official logo on the storefront, reads CHICK, the proper spelling proven by memorialized evidence of the real thing. But more importantly is once again simultaneous evidence found in the body of the article. It is riddled with the improper spelling CHIC. In this 1982 article, there is once again on the left side the proper spelling, and throughout the rest of the article numerous times, as well as a title heading, we see the incorrect spelling. Even as late as 1997, there is proof of this all too human error. In this article, the title states the wrong spelling, but the article itself contains the proper spelling. This clipping is merely a coupon, but shows the correct spelling coming from an official source in 1987. Yet another example of simultaneous evidence and human error in plain sight from 1999. The second point is if something is mistakenly read, perceived or assumed a certain way, and there are variations of these mistakes, shouldn't that also definitively tell us that human error is culpable through the recurring sensory processing perceptual faults that brought everybody to this point? On top of the CHIC error, some also believed it to be CHIK. Simultaneous error tells us yet again that more human beings make more mistakes that have ingrained themselves as true through persistence. In this article from 2005, we see the correct spelling and the other misspelling CHIK within the same exact article. And another from 2003 demonstrating CHIK and the correct spelling CHICK. This other article, also from 2003, shows this mistake between the actual name and CHIK. And one from 2006 exhibits this mistake. And another good example from 1977, as it demonstrates yet another variation of error. The author here spelled it correctly in the title, then goes on to spell it incorrectly as CHIK, FILLA, about 3 times no less, and then one time decides on the classic misspelled CHIK. Here's an interesting thing to note. There's evidence that Chick-fil-A is well aware of the mistaken variations of their name, and it seems CHIC was and is the most popular error, therefore of business interests. Now, how do we know this? Because of this little discovery. When you try to go to www.chic-fil-a.com, you get a redirect to the actual website chick-fil-a.com. Most of us know that the only true way to get a redirect is if you own both domains. And what's more is they haven't owned both until 2002. We can easily verify ownership. Seen here is the official record of URL ownership. So, the fact they own both, and were savvy enough to acquire both ownerships, demonstrates they of course have a finger on the pulse of consumers, as any smart business should. And in knowing that, by owning the URL with the wrong name and undoubtedly using it for keyword searches on the internet, they effectively redirect potential consumership to their actual website, chick-fil-a.com. More importantly, it proves the wrong spelling, CHIC, as it turns out, is not some secret alternate name only native to an alternate reality due to Mandela effect. CHIC is a mismemory of a misspelling, based on bias and assertion of that memory, of which the company is well aware. There are plenty more publications demonstrating these scenarios. Just like any of the other examples of other products with different memories, you will notice that there are no disparities with official product publications and trademarks, unless of course the company has a history or record showing a change. Disparities mostly come from laymen and the average individual simply making mistakes, as one thing's for sure, human blunder is always a factor in memory. Luckily, simultaneous evidence helps definitively disprove this effect on a more philosophical or logical level. Even with the off chance one of these products had seemingly never changed, but turns out they did at one point, we acknowledge this simple change as human intention or possible error. Let's continue to examine the reasons regarding these errors. The testimonies of these mismemories are funny at times. Some think if they insist forcibly enough, whatever that means, exclaiming,
"I've always pronounced it this way, and I've always remembered it this way,"
will in some way make it true while suggesting something is wrong with the universe, not them. And at times what they assert doesn't even make sense. For example, with Chick-fil-A, I've observed many mention that they've always pronounced it CHIC. But what the hell does that mean? How does one decipher a pronunciation between the two words without sounding ridiculous? In other words, if you're saying you pronounced it this way, then something must have been different about the pronunciation, obviously. Chick is a properly spelled word when abbreviated that infers poultry, while CHIC, as the alternatively pronounced, doesn't infer poultry and is a different word altogether. So you are referencing a fast food restaurant that specializes in chicken sandwiches, and you are contesting the way you pronounced a word that would otherwise denote those chicken sandwiches. It doesn't make any sense. What did you mean then by CHIC? What were you referring to in your head if you always pronounce it as CHIC? These are rhetorical questions to prove a point, as well as prepare the next segment. Why perceptual phenomena occur at all, reasons for the mass perceptual error, why it's perceived as CHIC, has to do with incongruity and what I mentioned moments ago, bias. In psychology, it is a well-known theory that explains moderate amounts of incongruity engage our attention and increase involvement when it comes to marketing. When something is very different without rhyme or reason, it may have an opposite effect. This is a great tool in marketing. For products and brands, there's a reason why misspelled words and hyphenated, abbreviated words and phrases are so common. Businesses exploit the fact that moderate incongruity produces a cue and takes us out of our environmental scheme. The flip side to that is, we self-edit to find equilibrium for salience. Using incongruity is a fine balancing act, one in which all variables cannot be known, and therefore all outcomes cannot exactly be known either. There are expectations such as anticipation of incongruent things and mixture of familiarity with incongruity. It is very much a balancing act comprising just the right share of incongruity without throwing the whole thing off. This signifies, and it should be of no surprise, we harbor bias. This bias then becomes the means to perceptual error. Bias can manifest as two different forms. One, as interference with our values, known as motivational bias. Two, how we process information and specifically edit and simplify it, known as cognitive bias. These biases are systematic, which means they aren't one-off blunders or stupidities specific to an individual, to a specific event. They are innate mechanisms in resolving incongruity. They create safeguards for thinking. The implication is that even within cues of incongruity, our salience lies with either consistency of that incongruity or our cognitive bias makes it so. This can happen on a predictive and grand scale. It isn't a mystery how mismemory comes about concerning large numbers of people. The mechanisms are innate, naturally such results unavoidable, even on a big scale. George Mandler's congruity theory and the incongruity salience model describes the mechanisms by which certain marketing cues and expectation within a particular scheme affects us. Salience depends on context, and since we are all perceivers, knowledge and expectation also determine salience. For an in-depth look at these models, check out Gianluigi Guido's work on marketing. So before a stimulus, moderate incongruity takes hold of our attention, while context, knowledge of perhaps similar products, and expectation fills in the rest. If one experiences incongruity, ironically, maintaining congruence of that means upholding that incongruity, and this occurs more in memory than it does by perceptual confirmation when the incongruity is not complete. Once the experience is had, where bias also played a role, bias continues to play a role to maintain that incongruity, since that is what created salience in a specific context. Do you really think where hyper-awareness is lacking, let alone needed, we aren't simply glancing over our environment? Of course we are. That our attention with the familiar isn't peripheral, so to speak? Of course it is. Do you think we have full undivided attention to our surroundings when we live in comfort? Of course not. Aren't we usually wrapped in our own reveries? Absolutely. We meet and deal with familiarity, incongruity, or congruity fittingly. Error is furtively present, and we have comfort of bias to bring the mind to salience within each context. Therefore, memory along bias play a big role after the fact of perception, and in place of it. What does this mean on a practical level? The perceptual experience of Chick-fil-A leaves one with incongruity of incongruence. I know it may come across as some stupid redundancy, but think about what it means. Since we know that in marketing, moderate incongruity yields better attention and focus on a product, the unexpected is now expected, even on a subconscious level. If the unexpected does not come up, or, like in the case of Chick-fil-A, partially, our bias wants to correct that. So, to do so, bias and memory truncated the K in order to further match the perceptual experience of the incongruity of filet. The unexpected, that is, expected based on the unexpected portion of the logo, spurs on the mismemory, in turn forcing the first portion to incongruity. Chick is a complete word in and of itself, and does not match the incongruent nature and therefore salience of the latter portion filet. This is bias in memory retrieval and also plays a huge role in marketing. When people insist they remember something a certain way, especially when dealing with incongruity, it is really a memory of their bias, and not a memory of the thing itself. Looking at newspapers, past quotes, magazines for evidence to definitively prove what something always was. For example, chick-fil-a is not reliable. All that is referencing other mirrored, biased memories. But to show error and the trivial nature and how the errors come about through newspapers and the like is a different story. Anecdotal support is actually an anecdote of the bias mechanism. There lies the indefatigable trait of memory. As I questioned earlier, how does one extricate a memory that is self-referencing? The mind is referencing the bias-edited version, what it has always known, which is then abstractly culled and applied to the real world, making comparisons and having conviction to the given bias memory as the real thing. When you have a slew of biased memories in addition to sudden hyper-awareness of error, well, you become shocked. Cognitive dissonance takes hold while the bias memory contests the now hyper-aware perceptual experience. The vehicle of hyper-awareness in this case is Mandela effect. This effect reveals itself as a psychological and cognitive phenomenon focused around the mechanism of bias, creating cognitive stress, otherwise not thought about consciously. Just as with the quote-unquote new detail, actually missed detail, such as with JFK and the Zapruder film, for example, we get cognitive dissonance based now on new focal hyper-aware detail. Familiarity and prior knowledge of things have an impact on how a stimulus affects us. If you're creating an incongruent thing that is also not familiar, it will probably have less success in grabbing and keeping attention. There are different reasons a name is chosen for a product. Familiarity, controversy, shock, incongruity, ease of remembering. Jif, as we'll see later, although easy to remember, seemingly lacks most of these qualities by any salient measure, and therefore faces incongruity with unfamiliarity. Bias at this point would be to resolve this unfamiliar incongruity, and so the memory fetches other words to fill in the blank. So we observe the errors as simultaneous evidence, and we come to understand some basics as to why these perceptual errors occur. Cognitive dissonance is then a result of conscious reflection of these errors, not because reality shifted and is impossibly clashing with your memory.